All right, peace and blessings, everybody. It's your brother Sorry, um, back with another one. I know it's been a minute. I know it's been a couple of days since I've been on this thing, whatever. Had been a couple corners and get this the True Master merch shop together, man. Y'all check that out, man. Treat yourself to a hat or a sweatshirt, something. I mean, put together a couple of pieces based on the themes of the book and everything like that. So kind of was working on some of that. Yeah, came back with a little interesting piece. I'm sure y'all see the title of the video. I want to do a volume 2 um about the history of the Guale part 2. Today we're gonna talk about the Mississippian era. You know what I mean? So we're gonna talk about Cahokia. We're gonna talk about the civilization um that was in the Mississippi River area that's not really talked about a lot. So, I've been gone for a couple of days, but coming back like Carl Malone with the mail, you know what I mean, right on time. So um gonna kind of jump into this. Now my sources are gonna be um I'm gonna reference the first Americans were African. Last time we came out of this book. I'm still going in Lanier Davis's material. Um, this is the Guale Origins book. I mean, the first one, the Blue Book. Um, the brother blessed me with another one of these titles. It kind of gets a little bit deeper into the history and everything like that. Uh, this one right here, it's the Green Book or whatever from Deptford to Mississippi by Lanier Davis. So this is gonna be a good one. Um, I'll try to have the brother on pretty soon. And with this one, I'm gonna kind of leave a little bit to the imagination because a lot of these other topics are gonna be covered a little bit more thoroughly when I get this brother on. Um, so kind of pick his brain for some of this good history and stuff like that. But this what we're gonna get into, right? We're gonna get into the history of the Guale Part 2, the Mississippian Era. Um, so this is gonna be a very good one. This is kind of gonna go into certain things or whatever because okay, a lot of times when we talk about certain things, like when we talk about the diaspora and everything like that, we always talk about the diaspora and we talk about the slavery thing. Lord knows we've been beat to death with a million slave movies, Amistad, Roots, Queen, all these slave movies. So that's been heavily ingrained in your psyche about the slavery thing, and we can't deny that that's something that um happened because slave dungeons in West Africa and everything like that. So that's a thing. I hate the argument when people bring up. I just want to touch on this. This video ain't even about this, but I just want to touch on this. I hate when people bring up the arguments like y'all enslaved your own people and stuff. No, no, chattel slavery is different than slavery in Africa. If back in the day, if I'm a slave, if you're my slave in Africa, I conquer your village. You're like my butler for a couple of years, and then you go be somebody with chattel slavery. You my slave, your daughter my slave, your mama my slave, everybody my slave to the end of time. If they have kids, they my slave, and you're treated no better than a dog. So in Africa, when so-called we enslaved our own people, all this stuff like this or whatever case may be, it was more of like an indentured servitude. You go to live with that person, and you go to be you basically they butler they made for a couple of years. So that's kind of like that thing or whatever. And I know it's probably extenuating circumstances and all this and that, certain outliers in the whole process. But I mean, you can read about it yourself or whatever. Chattel slavery in America was different from um, the forms of slavery in Africa. And a lot of times those Africans sold their people into slavery or whatever. They didn't realize what they were signing them people up for. So that's a whole nother different thing. So okay, so just not to go on a rant about that. But okay, so the history of the Guale, we're gonna do a recap from the previous video that we did. Yeah, I mean, so okay, so the previous video talked about the name Guale. Name Guale is of Spanish origin, thus connected with Spanish records. You see what I'm saying? When we talk about the word Gullah, like we talked about in the first video, Guale and Gullah are two derivatives of the same thing. In English, it's called Gullah, and in Spanish, it's called Guale. Gullah is its English variation. But the kicker here is that the Spanish arrived prior to the English or the British. The British arrived in the 1600s. Thus, a lot of the records and things that the Spanish would have laid down prior to them is going to be is going to have things that the British didn't have. And that's another thing. When you get into the names of these different peoples and stuff like that, you're at odds with what they call themselves, what other people called them, what the French called them, what the Spanish called them, what the British called them. So you're at odds with all these different things when you're trying to research some of this material. So moving right along. Okay, so as a recap, in the previous video we discussed the history of the Guale. It was stated that the Guale date back to 50,000 years ago, 50,000, 50,000 years ago, in the Americas. Radiocarbon dating by Dr. Albert Goodyear, who is the lead anthropologist at the Topper site. If you look up the Topper site, it suggests artifacts that are at least 20,000 years old. So he has artifacts at this site that are 20,000 years old, but the oral history of the Guale, according to them, they got here 50,000 years ago in America or what have you. Okay, so in the book, The First Americans Were African by the brother Dr. David Imhotep, he states that the inhabitants of Tierra del Fuego, the Fuegians, you see what I'm saying, have been there for 250,000 years. You see what I'm saying? And they speak a language with click consonants. I think in the previous video we talked about click consonants, the language with click consonants that the Pygmies or the Twa in Africa speak. And that language with click consonants, or the languages that have click consonants, are what we call language isolates. They don't have no known relative, no known languages that they come from. They popped out of nowhere and nobody knows where they come from. Okay, so similar to the language of the Twa in Africa, languages with click consonants are language isolates. We said that. Okay, so the Guale are related to the Algonquins. So when we get into the book, The First Americans Were African, or what have you, he talks about the Algonquins and how when the Algonquins became mixed, they became the Lenape. He goes all into the Wallam Olam, and he talks about the tribes and the battle in the Ohio River Valley and everything like that. Let me see here. The Guale are related to the Algonquin, who Dr. David Imhotep connects with the African Twa. We talked about in the previous video that the Algonquins are just an iteration of the Twa as they migrated all around the planet. And we talked about in the previous video, been around the world. We talked about the migration patterns of the Twa. So basically, there's this notion of let's say out of Africa and everything like that. But in a lot of these notions, and a lot of things we're gonna kind of like lay down here, that notion is often challenged because, as we can see, the Twa are all over the planet. There's damn near nowhere that there aren't little small pygmy people establishing civilization. Okay, because as we will see from some of the time frames that we're giving in America, America had its own thing going on. You see what I'm saying? During the time that the Twa or the Anu people are founding Heliopolis, Memphis, and all the cities of Egypt and everything like that, they're traveling up the Nile or whatever case may be. They're building civilization in America, North and South America, and everything like that. You see what I'm saying? These people have a long history. The Fuegians 250,000 years ago, or whatever case may be, that's in line with the Twa or whatever. So nobody went nowhere, or whatever case may be, for since a long, far gone time or whatever. There have been people over here and people over there simultaneously. So, okay, so that's just food for thought. Okay, so we spoke about let's see here. We spoke about how these same tribes in North America became your Aztec, Maya, and Olmecs. These people here been here 50,000 years. The Maya Olmec thing was just a phase. You know what I'm saying, of these same people or whatever that's been here. Okay, in the first Americans Were African, we are informed that the original Maya and Olmec were one and the same people. So the original Olmec, which we see the stone heads, they look just like Africans and everything like that. The Olmec and the Maya were the same thing. On the mural we showed on the previous video, let's see here. Yeah, this mural right here, on the cover of the Bonham Pack mural, he likens it to the Sistine Chapel of Mesoamerica. As you can see, a depiction of what the Maya looked like. You see what I'm saying? We already talked about the Olmec had universities to teach the Maya. You see what I'm saying? I think some people, I think the brother Dr. Clyde Winters, he laid down that there's a lot of Manding words in the Maya Olmec language and everything like that. You see what I'm saying? So like if we go, if now if we want to take the 50, if we want to take the 100,000 foot view, okay, so we saying that Manding words are in the Maya language or whatever case may be, and you have, let's say, the closest language they say to Middle Nature would be Wolof. They say that's two sides of the Niger Congo language family, two opposing sides of that large language family or whatever, which would suggest at some far gone era that they probably came from some common source at some far gone era. And that's just the 100,000 foot view. I know it's all kind of twists and turns in between that or whatever case may be in both of those statements that Maya has a lot of Manding languages, Manding words in it and stuff like that. Wolof being the closest thing to Middle Nature, I know those are like, I don't know, large approximations of things. So that's a 50,000 foot view type statement or whatever case may be. But I'm just kind of trying to illustrate the fact that um, since a far gone era, these two places two had their own things going on or whatever case may be. There's evidence that they intertwined or whatever case may be. They had contact or whatever, but they had their own things going on. So let's see here. Um, let's see. In the Guale Origins book by Lanier Davis, he informed us that the Guale are the same people who migrated out of Mexico. Okay, in the Guale Origins book by Lanier Davis, he informed us that the Guale are the same people who migrated out of Mexico circa 900 AD into the southeast United States, the southeast of North America. Okay, so these same people, migrate the Olmec Maya or whatever, when they abandoned their cities, this historic event where everybody talks about what happened to the Maya when they abandoned their cities or whatever, or a portion of them abandoned many significant cities or what have you. They dispersed across the Caribbean, into Central America, and into North America. And some people even say that they sailed over to what do you call it, Nagaland and India and everything like that. That's a whole nother story or whatever case may be uh, about that or whatever case may be. But they went up into the southern um, North America, southern continent of North America. The southern part of the North American continent, excuse me. Okay, so this can be evidenced by prior to circa 1000 AD, coastal people had little to no contact with maize. Okay, so as we know, the Olmec Maya or whatever case may be, that was a staple in their diet. The corn crop. They even had whole deities. You see what I'm saying? Associated with maize, Zip Totep. You see what I'm saying? The god of corn and all this stuff like that. So it had all kind of different um, things that established that as a major thing in a culture. However, the Native Americans in the coastal regions of the American Southwest, they had no, um, they weren't familiar with corn or whatever case may be until around 1000 AD or whatever case may be when that migration took place. What we're talking about. Okay, so later becoming the major dietary staple along with beans and squash, known as the Three Sisters. So later on, you get into corn becomes a staple for the indigenous population in America, along with beans and squash. They become known as the Three Sisters and everything like that. There are whole festivals associated with that. Um, and what have you. But the origin of maize in America would be Mexico. Okay, so the history of the Guale is a vast expanse stretching 50,000 years, right? It is typically divided up into different eras of time where a particular group was more dominant. Okay, so it's important to mention here, we're talking about the mound builders. Okay, so when we talk about mounds, they um, Africans built mounds in on the continent of Africa. They're called tels, like Tel Aviv or Tel Amarna, like in Egypt and stuff like that. So they're called tels in Africa. They're called mounds in the United States. Um, okay, so these various cultures that we're talking about, from the Guale to we're gonna talk about the Swift Creek culture and the Mississippian culture and stuff like that. All of those cultures were mound builders, as opposed to the red Native Americans who did not build mounds or whatever the case may be. Though they look more like the classical depictions of Tonto and Tonto that's with the Lone Ranger and all that stuff like that. More I don't know, the Apache phenotype type deal, or whatever case may be. These are more mound builders. They are more in line with the Olmec Maya type phenotype. You see what I'm saying? So much so to the point where many of them are reclassified as Negroes as we get into our discourse a little bit later, and that's going to be a point that we're going to actually talk about. When I get Brother Lanier Davis on here, just kind of throw that in the mix or whatever case may be. The whole concept of reclassifying Indians as Negroes and everything like that. So moving right along. Okay, so let's see here. When we speak of the Mississippian era, that's circa 800 AD to 1600 AD, as discussed by Lanier Davis, it is a process for the cultural advancement to accumulate and form what we know as Mississippian culture, right? So when we talk about the Mississippians tie into the Yamassee that I'm always talking about, or what have you. So these are all mound builder cultures, or whatever case may be. The mound builders of the so-called, for lack of a better way of saying, and I know all my people, y'all don't beat me up. We just doing it for the sake of this conversation. The so-called Black Native Americans or whatever, those are your mound builders. So Mississippian culture is the successor to the earlier Swift Creek culture or the Seminole culture, 100 to 800 AD. Okay, the Swift Creek culture added to the cultural foundation laid down by the Guale during the era of the Deptford culture, and that's 3000 BC. So as we can see, we kind of going on back. We kind of going on back, and all of these different eras have dominant cultures or whatever, but all of these are still mound builders. It's the same theme, the same people. Okay, let's see. You have the Deptford culture, 3000 BC. You got the let's see, woodland culture, 3000 BC to 1000 AD. You got the archaic Guale period, that's 10,000 BC to 2500 years ago, 10,000 to 2500 years ago. Then you have the old quartz. I think that's probably 13,000. I couldn't really. The dates are harder to find, and I'll ask Brother Davis about that one. Um, let's see. These are all mound builders. The Gualile, the Swinole, and the Mississippians are all mound builders. They all that's a common theme in their culture. There's a common significance um, to the mounds in their particular culture. Okay, so yeah, so we're gonna get into this real quick. Um, and we're gonna go into this. We're gonna go into a little bit more detail on what we're talking about. Just kind of want to give like I don't know, a bit of a recap, kind of prime the discussion of what we're gonna talk about. So bear with me just 1 second. All right, so the Deptford culture and its origins. The archaic cultural traditions spread widely from the east coast to the Great Plains by 8000 BC beneath these waters. Kyron Kane. So it's a quote from a quote he lists in the book. Okay, so the Southeast United States has long been a region rich in indigenous history and home to numerous cultured people which have shaped it for over 50 millennia, emerging from 3000 BCE, 2500 years earlier than thought. The Deptford culture was a socio-economic and cultural development which was, as Adena and Hopewellian traditions, mothers of the historic societies. It was a late grandchild of cultures such as Old Quartz, Archaic, and Woodland. The Deptford culture takes its name from site 9CH2 located in Chatham County, Georgia, emerging from earlier woodland period societies. Is built upon the legacy of the Archaic period, archaic Guale, which was characterized by advancements in pottery production and mound building and extensive trade networks. The rise of the Deptford culture marked a significant shift to a more complex social organization and material culture spanning regions now known as South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and the Ohio Valley. The Deptford people were deeply attuned to their environment. They were all known for their distinctive art and finely crafted pottery, often decorated with symbols. Their burial practice, which included the construction of intricate burial mounds and cremation, reflected a period of cultural uniformity across these regions. The emergence of the Deptford culture coincided with the decline of earlier traditions from Middle and Late Archaic periods. These predecessors had established extensive trade networks that spanned vast distances, exchanging essential goods such as exotic materials, salt, shells, copper, foodstuffs, and mica. These trade connections not only facilitated economic exchange but also fostered relationships that shaped the development of complex societies that followed in the region. All right. Now he does go into, various different intricacies of the crafts, the innovations as far as some of the tools that they use, their usage of quartz and everything like that. You see what I'm saying? So when you actually kind of get this in your hands, you'll get a little bit more detail than what I'm giving. I'm kind of skipping around a little bit to kind of make some of these points. I'm gonna go back into let's see, a section called proper identification. The social and political structure of the Deptford culture is best understood through settlement patterns and layout of its villages. Their settlement patterns distinct from their late archaic predecessors, such as the Stalling Islands culture. Deptford settlements were typically dispersed villages situated near rivers and streams. These locations provided access to water and fertile land, which supported agriculture and facilitated trade. Archaeological evidence suggests continuity between the Deptford cultures and the succeeding Wilmington and Savannah cultures in Georgia, reflected in both language and ceramics. The people known as Deptford referred to themselves as Ibili, or ancient ones. This can be found in all Muskogean languages as Abili, Timucuan, and Soyan language as Ikwi. The term Guale is found in multiple indigenous languages and dialect: Appalachian, Gualili, or Whaley, border or edge. In Hatchiti, the term Wahali in Apali translates as downstream or south. People opposite of us. Timucua speakers called uh, Upaha, Ibaha, high people, with Castilians mistranslated as um, Yaguja, Yaguga, Ugala, or Guale. So basically, what he's saying, the Castilians, we were saying that Guale is of a Spanish origin. He was saying when the Castilians arrived, they mistranslated um, what the people were saying, and that's how they arrived at the Guale. Um, a Guale, dawn, place where the sun is. Ubale, high, noon, highest point of the sun. Hina, Wadele, heat, summer is near. Spring, Wade, moderate, heat, summer. Wafe, the place where heat is south. Okay, the language commonly referred to as Proto-Muskogean. So remember how we were talking about when you research something with these certain tribes or what have you, you're gonna run across different names. Muskogee, that but it's a whole Muskogee people. Muskogee tie into the Creek, the Yamassee, all that. The language commonly referred to as Proto-Muskogean played a key role in facilitating trade exchanges. Linguistic reconstructions highlight its deep historical roots and the complexity of trade networks in the region. Before the emergence of Proto-Muskogean, ancient languages formed the foundation for what eventually merged into the Mississippian trade language. So what he's going to get into, he's going to talk about Yama, what we call, what we saying Yama is Yamassee, basically what was known as Yamassee or what have you. But he's talking about how that derived. Yama was the trade language. It was the lingua franca, the language people spoke to trade, kind of like how people speak English all over the world or whatever case may be for the purpose of doing business and stuff like that. So Yama was the trade language and what have you. Okay, these early tongues. So by the time the Europeans got there and they seen everybody speaking that same language, they called everybody Yama or Yamassee. That's that. Even if they weren't directly, you know, a part of that or whatever, even if they just spoke the language. Okay, so these early tongues spoken by diverse cultures predate the Muskogean language family as we know it. These ancestral languages evolved over time, contributed to Yama's development as the as the Mississippian lingua franca, enabling communication and trade among indigenous groups across the southeastern United States. During the Reconstruction, over 100 cognates were uncovered. Importantly are Taka, fire, war, Abi, ancient ones, and crop. Linguistic anthropologists have worked with botanists to identify dates when crops migrated. The origin of the merger, they provide a date, uh, uh, 2,690 um, before present era plus 350 years. Amazing migration legends are now being used to describe the trade between major tribal parties in the Americas. What was once seen as mythology is in fact oncology. So uh, he goes further into the clan systems and things of that nature, whatever the case may be. We're gonna kind of move right along. I'm skipping around a little bit. The brother goes into the transition from the Guale um, period, what he talked about, or the Deptford period, the Deptford culture and everything like that, and those cultures around that time, around that era of time, and he transitions and he shows he talks about the origin and the rise of the Swift Creek uh, culture and everything like that. Um, I'm, like I said, we're gonna have a conversation with the brother, so we can get into all that. Obviously, you purchased the book, you can definitely get into all that. Let me see here, but when we get into this, the part I'm going to get into next is going to talk about their trade network, the exchange of ideas. So just to see how far and how extensive their network is, because a lot of times when we take certain people's perspective on this type of stuff or whatever, we look at indigenous people as like damn near caveman like, and that couldn't be further from the truth as we're about to see. And a lot of times when we research a lot of this stuff, like it said in Dr. David Imhotep's work, when they say Paleo Americans or whatever, they're just talking about before the Holocene. They just talking about prior to 12,000 years ago. That don't mean they know they're still people. You see what I'm saying? They're still people doing things, making things, having a culture and everything like that, or whatever case may be. But Paleo Americans is just prior to 12,000 years. It's before the Holocene, the trick language that they use. Okay, so exchange of goods and ideas, uniting the Southeast. The Swift Creek people, known as the Swanoli, Shawnee, Lenape, the people near the sun, were part of an extensive trade network that spanned the southeastern United States and beyond through their connections to the Yama, the Mississippi, and the Ohio River valleys, the Gulf Coast, and the Great Lakes, and even Caribbean. They were central figures in a vast exchange of goods and ideas. This exchange included a wide variety of exotic materials, furs, metals, and other items used to create tools, ornaments, and ceremonial objects. In the Kolomoki region, these materials reveal the complex nature of the Swanoli people's trade relationships. Artifacts from distant regions, including the Caribbean, including the Caribbean. Remember, we said these people traveled all about it. Even when the Maya dispersed, they dispersed all over the Caribbean and everything like that. Okay, so provide evidence of long distance trade, showing that the Swanoli were part of a broader cultural network that spans seas and vast territories. The Lake Yahola, named for a great deity, can also be found in the Union name of the East, further connecting the spiritual and material exchanges between regions. Did you know that the Kolomoki invited many Kalinago or Carib, like the Carib Indians, peoples uh, to their ceremonial activities? The presence of Kalinago loan words in many indigenous North American languages underscores the deep cultural influence these exchanges had on both spiritual and linguistic practices. Swanoli people's trade connections also led to the development of intricate social and political structures. Trade goods like conch shell, or gorgets, and other ceremonial paraphernalia from the Caribbean were uncovered in mound complexes, reflecting not just material wealth but spiritual and social prestige. The accumulation of such materials allowed communities to display their statues and authority, which was reinforced by their access to rare sacred items from South America, Mesoamerica, and the Caribbean islands. So basically, these people had vast trade networks that went down into Central and South America from North America. You see what I'm saying? That went various different places. And how do we know that? Because when they explored the mounds, they found goods that only occur in these places. Okay, the process of acquiring these materials and weavings them into the fabric of local culture was not only a demonstration of wealth, but was also a means of telling creation and migration stories, establishing ancestral connections and affirming one's place in a larger network of people. The complexity of these trade routes and the accumulation of wealth would later play a critical role in the rise of the Mississippian chieftains, where control over trade networks and the distribution of goods became directly linked to political power. Okay, I'm gonna get into one last little section before we actually get into the part where he talks about the Mississippians. Again, I'm jumping around a lot. He has a lot of additional little tidbits in this. He talks about that culture, the clan system, the whole nine. I'm just kind of skipping around to kind of make a point. Let's see here. As we explored as we explored in the chapters to come, the Swanoli and the Gualili people were pivotal in shaping the foundations of what would later become Mississippian culture. Around 1000 CE, the Mississippians expanded eastward, building on the innovations of the Swanoli and Gualili people. These earlier cultures had already laid the groundwork in technology, art, and social organization, and their influence would be felt across the region in the centuries that followed. The Mississippians began to adopt many of the same artistic traditions, social structures, and technological innovations pioneered by their Swanoli and Gualili predecessors. Remember, these are all mound builders. Okay. While this period is often honored by European historians, it is essential to recognize that the Mississippian culture as it developed was deeply rooted in the cultural practices that came before it. From the period of European contact in 1400s to the 1700s, the Mississippian era would be viewed through a colonial lens. So this is around the time Europeans start coming, or whatever case may be. So it overlaps with the Mississippian era. Okay, through a colonial lens, often distorted its true nature as an indigenous cultural achievement. Okay, um, yeah. So it's funny how this isn't talked about like this. You see what I'm saying? We're often given slave narratives, but we never talked about how, you know, in certain places the so-called Indians and the slaves looked so similar that, you could change the status of an Indian and pass him off as a slave and put him into slavery. You see what I'm saying? So is that similar. So okay, so one of the most significant ways the Swanoli influence is seen in the Mississippian period is in the ceramic traditions. The stamping and incised pottery techniques developed by the Swanoli with their symbolic motifs and rigid designs were absorbed and refined by the Mississippians. Over time, these techniques became even more intricate as the Mississippians utilized multiple grits to harden pottery, creating more durable and intricate pieces. This marked a significant evolution in ceramic craftsmanship, and the complex designs continue to reflect a deep connection to the spiritual and social life. The mound building practices that emerged in the Swanoli period, they were mound builders again, particularly the reuse of mounds for residential, defensive, ceremonial, and burial purposes became a badge of Mississippian culture. These grand mound buildings practices central to social and spiritual life of the Mississippian communities had their roots in earlier traditions. The presence of these mounds not only indicated the cultural continuity, but also highlighted the increasing complexity of social structures. The hierarchical social organization that began to shape in the Swanoli culture played a critical role in the development of the Mississippian political system. As the Mississippian societies grew, they became more centralized, with powerful chiefdoms emerging from the earlier clan-based systems. In these new chiefdoms, the towns became the central unit of power, and the role of the leader expanded beyond local governance, trade, social stratification, and spiritual practices which had been established by the Swanoli and the Gualili ancestors served as unifiers for this new cultural and socio-economic class. These practices, while evolving, continue to play a role in defining the relationship between different groups within the Mississippian world. Okay, I'm gonna go into one last section, from the brother's book. Again, as you can see, I'm hitting up one or two pages here and there, and it's a lot more I'm leaving out. So um, it's a lot more detail that he goes into, you know, with this material. So let's see here. Chapter 3. It was said before that it's a process before they get into the Mississippian culture. But as you can see, as we kind of like went through the little snippets we went through in this, you can kind of see these are different iterations of the same people building upon each other's advancements and stuff like that. Um, they migrated to a different place, assimilating different people and different technologies and different things or whatever, but still keeping a somewhat of a cultural continuity throughout the whole process or what have you. And the Guale would be looked at as the foundation in the way the brother lays this out, and the Mississippians would be like the zenith, so called, if you want to view it that way, as far as um, the American Southeast is concerned. So let's get into this chapter 3 real quick. The transformation into Mississippian culture. Okay, so Mississippian beauty was founded on the blood of Seminole peoples, and that's a quote by Mickey Red Crane. So he's just saying basically the Mississippians are they're benefiting off of previous of their off of their ancestors' work and toil and everything like that. So let's see here. Okay, so the shift from earlier cultural phases such as the Seminole to the rise of the Mississippian culture in the southeastern United States marked a profound transformation in socio-organizational architecture and spiritual practices. The tradition occurred between 800 CE and 1600 CE in one of the most significant in the pre-Columbian history of the North America. It was not an abrupt change, but a gradual evolution that reflected both continuity and innovation. The Mississippian cultures developed the complex chiefdoms, monumental earthworks, and an intricate network of trade routes spanning the entire continent. Right? Okay, so the emergence of the Mississippian culture is deeply connected to the growth of agricultural practices, the expansion of trade networks, and the rise of new social hierarchies. Earlier cultures, such as the Seminole, were already experimenting with agriculture and trade long before the Mississippians fully developed their society. The Mississippians built upon these foundational practices, cultivating maize, beans, and squash, also known as the Three Sisters. I think we talked about that um, prior, which provided a stable food source that supported larger and more complex societies. The transition into Mississippian culture can also be traced through archaeological evidence. Around 1000 CE, the Lenape migrated into the Ohio River Valley during the Hopewellian period. The Lenni Lenape, who once resided in the western part of the American continent, set out eastward in search of new territory. I think we talked about that in the previous video. That's in the Wallam Olam. That's when they got into the conflict in the Ohio River Valley. They arrived at the Mississippi, or the Mississippi River, where they encountered the Mingwe, the Iroquois, or Five Nations. Together, they decided to conquer the Ohio Valley. At this time, the Teligwe and the Yama, who had migrated from South America, from Mexico, like we talked, um, were already living on the sun side of the Mississippi. These groups, along with the Edema and the Hopewellian cultures, contributed to the origin of the earthworks found in Ohio and West Virginia. The Blackfoot, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, who originally migrated from the west, were defeated in battle and never returned to the east, retreating instead to the Snow Mountains, Montana. Meanwhile, the people who would form the founding Muskogee clans began migrating eastward, where a series of battles had already taken place. The Muskogee removed the Alabamans to the Muskogee removed the Alabamans to the Ohio Valley, no longer finding enemies to fight. The Muskogee took possession of the land they had conquered. They established settlements along the river of Coosa, Tallapoosa, Chattahoochee, Flint, Okmulgee, and Oconee, extending as far as the Savannah River in Georgia, where present-day Augusta is located. Here are the places the Castilians found them. So by the time the Spanish got there, that's where they landed at. By the time the Spanish got there, or those are the when I say they landed, I'm saying that's where their migration had ended by the time the Spanish got there. Okay, in the southern United States, civil unrest, famine drove many people to migrate north. Mound building, a practice common among the groups, had been in place for at least 20,000 years um, before the rise of the Mississippian culture. By the time the Mississippians reached their peak, The largest mounds became central to political and spiritual life, symbolizing both spiritual power and social hierarchy. Let me see here. Almost finished. The Mississippians, united by a confederacy, came to dominate the region 700 to 1600 CE. The city of Cahokia became the cultural and political center of this powerful civilization. Cahokia is in St. Louis, if I'm not mistaken, where they believed that their gods had blessed the land as their own. They achieved the dominance through total war, carved out their place in history as one of the most influential cultures of pre-Columbian North America. Cahokia. We'll do the section on Cahokia, get into some of their trade networks so you can see how extensive their reach was, and then we'll cap it off right there. And like I said, we're gonna have the brother Lanier Davis on here to kind of like go into all the areas that I kind of want to talk about, but I want to save and let you know let someone potentially more qualified than myself to go in a lot more in detail on that. Okay, Cahokia, a model of Mississippian society. Cahokia, located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, and was named by a Frenchman in 1699 after the Cahokia tribe. At its height, Cahokia was a bustling urban center that housed as many as 20,000 to 40,000 people during their ceremonies. The site's most prominent feature is Monk's Mound, the largest earthen mound in North America, standing nearly 100 feet tall. This mound, along with others at the site, served both spiritual and political purposes, symbolizing the power of the elites who governed the city. Monk's Mound was created at a time of unification, and the procession of the Mississippians, as we will call them, built on top of it as told by the Delaware and Nennecote, the lands of the Guale, uh, were already constructed. The Yama, Tisoya, and Mispa had sophisticated agricultural techniques. In Cahokia, they raised fields, allowed provisions for the population. The surplus in maize production led to the growth of a new social and political hierarchy which had came together. The leaders of these societies were not just political leaders, but also spiritual leaders, were connected not only to the land, but the forces of nature. the Soyo, the Tsoyo Yoha are credited, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, credited for bestowing the ritual to the people called green corn, um, like the green corn festival. Green corn was not just a ceremonial symbol, but it was the reconstructing of a once powerful trade network that had originated in Mesoamerica at the Temple of the Sun. Yama can be found in Itza language as Jama, the friends, companions. Okay, so we're gonna get into their trade networks just a little bit. Okay, trade was also the cornerstone of Yama life, thriving across the southeastern United States during this period. The Yama built upon existing trade routes connecting the southeast to the Great Lakes, Gulf Coast, and beyond, extending as far as the Midwest, Texas, because when we get into Texas, you get into the Washita, and that's another like a sister tribe to the Yamassee. I mean, they come from similar roots. These that's one of the things we're gonna I'll let the other brothers elaborate on. I think they'll be able to go a lot more in depth as far as that's some interesting material right there. These expansive networks facilitated not only the exchange of goods such as maize, salt, shell, pottery, and even captives, but also the flow of ideas, spiritual practice, and technologies. The Yama were skilled craftsmen creating intricate ritual jewelry and ceremonial objects from material gathered through these far reaching trade connections. Copper artifacts, including engraved plates, spoons, breastplates, stone tablets, paddles, and other items, were unearthed at Cahokia, corroborated by the accounts of Hernando de Soto's army. These trade routes allowed for the exchange of essential items like food, clothes, and pottery, and the distinctive designs found on pottery pieces reflecting cultural diffusion from distant regions. These trade networks also played a significant role in the spread of the Yama ceremonial practices. For example, to the south, salt deposits were strategically controlled, reflecting fears of encroachment from outside groups alongside tangible goods. Symbolic rituals such as effigy pipes, copper offerings, moving along these routes, carrying profound meanings that link the Yama people to their gods, ancestors, in the natural world. Through trade, the Yama not only exchanged material goods but also reinforced and expounded their cultural, spiritual, and political reach. And I'm a stop right there in that. As you can see, the amount of detail the brother goes into as far as the culture, the different things that they um did, how their society functions. The next section after that part I just read, he goes into the purpose of the mounds, significance of the mounds and their culture and everything like that. Um, but I just want to kind of get into that to go into the various phases or the various eras of the mound builders. Um, okay, so let's see. Lanier Davis goes into the purpose of the mounds. Let's see here. That's for y'all to buy the book. Get that. So there is a distinction between the mound builders and what's traditionally called the Red Native Americans. When the Olmec Maya dispersed around 900 AD, they spread out all over the Caribbean. So the blood of the Southeast, the blood of people in the Southeast United States, um, the so-called Negro in the Southeast United States, namely that, but not limited to that, may be intertwined with the blood of people of the Caribbean as well as Central America and Mexico. So the indigenous people migrated up into the Southeast United States. They had vast trade networks going to the north of them, the northern United States, as well as down into Mexico and Central America, as well as the Caribbean. So they had contact with all those people as well. So let me see here. Let's see. And another thing, we may do a whole piece on the South American. This is bro Davis, he put me on this one, told me to look this one up. So I was looking at it and it looked kind of interesting. This piece right here, the South American model of archaic Caribbean settlement. So that's an interesting piece right there. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So, and that's basically saying that the model of settlement, the model of peopling this region of the country or what have you didn't come from traditional places or whatever. It actually came from South America or whatever the case may be. So we'll probably do a whole piece on that. And I know the brother's probably gonna speak on that when we get him on a little bit later. Okay, so basically when Europeans got to the land of America in the colonial era, especially the British coming in the end of the mid 1600s, they're in the Mississippian era of time. Okay, so when we read about, when we read about the Yamassee of South Carolina and the Yamassee War of 1713, so when we get into this is how we get Seminoles and Seminole Wars and all this stuff like that. This is the beginning of that. So this shows how we get from the Mississippians, the Yama people, Mississippians, the Guale, all that stuff like that, Swift Creek and everything like that, all the way down into, let's say, the Yamassee that are in the Yamassee War of 1713. And then that's a whole nother conversation when you get into, your five tribes and your five civilized tribes of Native Americans. That's a whole nother conversation or whatever. But so when we get into the let's see here. We read about the Yamassee of South Carolina because there's a Yamassee County in South Carolina. And the Yamassee War of 1713. These are an iteration of the ancient Guale, like how we just talked about, how all of these people are mound builders and they basically add on to each other's culture or whatever because they're the same people. Okay, from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, is called the Gullah Geechee Corridor. Okay, so after the events of 1713, many of the Yamassee were hunted down because they had war with the Europeans and everything like that. So this is, you can read about the Yamassee War 1713. Many of the Yamassee were hunted down. Some fled. Some changed their identity to avoid death. Some, you see what I'm saying, what happened to individuals like that. Some were reclassified as Negroes. Let's see here. And many fled into Spanish Florida and would later be called Seminoles, right? Runaways. The state of Georgia was said to be established as a blockade between South Carolina and Florida. Georgia was founded in 1732. You see what I'm saying? So Georgia, all the whole state of Georgia, from what I've been told, from what I from how I understand it to be, the whole state of Georgia is abandoned Yamassee land. If you look up Yamassee tribe, that's a extinct tribe. That's what they say. You see what I'm saying? But you know, that's a whole nother conversation. It's not an extinct tribe or whatever the case may be. I mean, what's the brother Chief Hidden Eagle, Chief Sekou? He puts out material all the time. I think he has like a textbook. You see what I'm saying, that he wrote about the Yamassee and everything like that. They're not an extinct tribe. The conflict is called the Seminole Wars in popular history, or the Gullah Wars by some, because like Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, Gullah Geechee corridor and everything like that. They fleeing from South Carolina into Florida and stuff like that. Andrew Jackson said, "Y'all sent me here to fight Indians, but I've been fighting Negro since I've been here. I've been fighting, ends since I've been here." You understand that? So, uh, let's see here, and I'm gonna save some of the impact that he does talk about that in his book. I'm gonna save some of the impact of slavery and all that on the Guale cultural framework and everything like that. I'm gonna save some of that and let the brother talk about it. I think he's more qualified to talk about that. I'm going to have the brother on, so I'm gonna let him go into the impact of chattel slavery and slave Negro had on the culture of the melanated mound builder culture of the Southeast United States. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I had today. I just want to kind of go into. I ran over a little bit longer than I thought, but man, I haven't done one. We hadn't kicked it in a little bit over a week. I ain't got a chance to kick it with the true and living. Y'all the true and living. If you're watching this video, I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I got a chance to kick it with the true and living for a minute. So yeah, thank y'all for tuning in. That was an interesting piece on the history of the Guale, part two, the Mississippian era. Hope y'all enjoyed it. And y'all like what y'all been hearing. Like and subscribe. Y'all don't forget about me, man. Check out some of the merch in the True Master merch shop. We'll be back with another one. Stay tuned.